Thanks for joining Biomed and Dr. Melina Roberts for the presentation on Beyond the Gut, the Microbiome and Mental Health. Dr. Roberts is a leading authority in biological medicine, and she incorporates this innovative technology to treat complex chronic disease, women's health issues, including mood and mental health, hormonal balancing, pediatric health, digestive disorders, and cancer. She studied with leaders around the world and uses a huge variety of specialized therapies and treatment and testing modalities within her practice. Dr. Roberts is an international lecturer on a diversity of topics that definitely includes optimizing health from the microbiome and the microenvironment to treating natural cancers. She also has published a book, Building a Healthy Child, and has all kinds of articles in scientific journals and magazines. She also has a podcast on iTunes called Building Health with Dr. Melina Roberts, and her YouTube station is ranked in the top 30 of naturopathic YouTube stations. If you go to her website, then you can see all kinds of presentations on there. Dr. Roberts graduated from CCNM, and she definitely likes to do a lot of outdoor activities in her spare time with her family. So I'm really pleased to have Dr. Roberts presenting on Beyond the Gut, the Microbiome and Mental Health. And with that said, then let's pass the ball over to Dr. Roberts, and she can begin the presentation.
All right. So thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored for all of you to be here, and I'm always honored to be asked by Biomed to speak for them. And thank you, Heather, for such a great introduction. Yeah, there's lots going on in the world, and I think that this is a pretty timely presentation to be doing because I think that mental health is besides being Mental Health Week this week, I think that what's going on with this pandemic is actually, unfortunately, going to lead to a lot of mental health issues, but it also means that it's an area that we are going to be able to help a lot of our patients in this area. So just to go over some statistics, the major depressive disorders is the leading cause of disability worldwide, and in Canada, 1 in 5 people will personally experience mental health issues. And mental health issues tend to have a comorbidity. So there's usually, in a lot of cases, you'll see anxiety and depression with some sort of chronic digestive issue. So they tend to go hand in hand, and this presentation will really explain why. And then I wanted to just kind of go through some of the research and just see, how is mental health being affected right now with what's going on with COVID-19. And what I came across was that there has been a poll done where they found that 45% of adults reported that they were experiencing some mental health issues, that they were negatively affected from what was going on with COVID-19, and I think that we're going to see that. I think that that's going to be one of the major repercussions of what's going on with this pandemic. Now, initially what it was called was this gut-brain axis, so the huge connection between the gut and the brain. And what they've been finding with the research that they've been doing with the microbiome is that the microbiome actually plays a critical role in how that gut-brain axis functions. So what they have renamed it is the microbiome gut-brain axis to include that microbiome because it plays such a huge role. And with this, microbiome gut-brain axis, what we find is that there's a bi-directional communication in the system. So I think, when we're learning things, we typically understand that top-down reaction in terms of the nervous system controlling every other system of the body. But what they're finding is that there's also this bidirectional communication. So we're also getting communication from what's going into the gut, what's going on in terms of those microbiome, communicating back up to the nervous system. So a bottom-up communication, which is really interesting when they're doing that research. And what we see is that it affects a number of different systems of the body. And that's what I'm going to go through, is all those different connections. Now, with those connections, we have physical connections and we have biochemical connections that connect the brain and the gut. The microbiome is a big one. It's really interesting because with our those microbes will actually produce some of the metabolic products that the brain needs. The lymphatic system is a pretty new discovery, but the lymphatic system has been linked to have a connection from that lymphatic system to the brain. The glymphatic system, also a relatively new discovery in science, but that connects the gut and the brain together. The vagal nerve, which is one of our longest nerves, and it connects the cranial nerves to the gut, and it's a physical connection. And another physical connection there is the enteric nervous system. And so these are the nerves that are like within the gut lining, within those gut walls. And again, it's connecting the gut and brain. There's the neurotransmitters, the famous one of the serotonin. So I'll talk more about that one. And then we also have the HPA axis, which is, our stress response and how it relates to this microbiome gut-brain connection. So the microbiome, huge area of research, and I find it pretty fascinating. It's this ecosystem of bacteria and fungus that live within our gut, weighs about 1 kilo, and there's lots of them. There's more of them than there are cells in our body. When they look at the genetic material, it has 100 times more genes than we have in the human genome. And that gut microbiota is really essential for our gut health, but it also plays a huge role in normal physiology in terms of every organ of our system, but it also plays a role in terms of how our brain functions. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about more today. And this gut microbiome can be altered. And the challenge is that when that gut microbiome is altered, it can profoundly impact how our brains function. And so this is why this microbiome is so important in terms of that gut-brain connection. And I touched on it a little on that last slide, but there are like essential metabolic products that the gut microbes actually produce, and the brain needs those. But I think what's interesting and what you really need to understand is that the microbiome is really a dynamic entity. It's constantly changing, and it's influenced by so many different factors. And understanding the dynamic nature of the microbiome, I think is also really important for us to really understand. And so what researchers have looked at recently is that they have coined this term called psychobiotics. And what the psychobiotics really are is that they are live bacteria, probiotics, that have a beneficial effect on our mental health. And what they've seen is that these psychobiotics can exert some anxiolytic and some antidepressant effects in terms of the body. So how much these psychobiotics are really affecting brain function. And, they've studied a number of these probiotics and found out that a number of them have these psychobiotic properties to them. the main ones that are showing up as the psychobiotics are the bifidobacterium and the lactobacillus families, but there are a few others there. But there's a list of a number of them that have been researched. Now let's talk about the lymphatic system. Lymphatic system, I would say in biological medicine, we've been talking about this connection for a long period of time. The lymphatic system is cleaning up all of our tissues, moving toxic loads out of our body. Also a very dynamic system, also constantly needs to be moving in order to clean up our system. About 70% of that lymphatic drainage happens within our digestive tract, called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. But what they've newly discovered is that the lymphatic system also drains the brain. So there's a lymphatic system of the brain. So if you look at that picture there, you'll see on the left is the old picture of the lymphatic system. And then this is the new discovery, is that there's now a lymphatic system that drains the brain. So very much a direct connection. But here's the challenge, is that when we get a compromised gut wall, so when we have a breach of the intestinal lining, and we get basically injuries to those tight junctions, then food or toxins that are in the lumen of the digestive tract have direct access to our bloodstream, but they also have direct access to our lymphatic system, which means that toxins and undigested foods also have direct access to our brains and to our nervous system and how they function. And so this can actually be quite problematic when we have a compromised gut wall that's leading to a lot of inflammation. So there's these things called endotoxins. So often we'll talk about exotoxins, and exotoxins are toxins that are coming in from the external environment. But then we also have these things called endotoxins, and endotoxins are toxins that are from internal. And there are these kind of more famous endotoxins called the peptidoglycan and the lipopolysaccharides. And what they are is they are just breakdown products of the bacteria in our digestive tract. And what they're finding is that these endotoxins can translocate, which just basically means that they move from the lumen of the digestive tract through the lining of the digestive tract, so there's been a breach in that lining, into the bloodstream or into the lymphatic system, and then they can have direct access to the brain. And what they found is that when these breakdown products, when these endotoxins move through the gut lining, that they can initiate an immune response, and we can have, we can have an immune response, and it can also be affecting how the brain's acting or developing and the behavior. So it's really interesting in terms of endotoxins. We talk a lot about those in terms of the digestive tract, but it's also having an effect on the brain. And then we see this showing up in the research, is that in terms of depression, it's associated with a chronic low-grade inflammatory response. So there's inflammation there. In depression, we also see an increased permeability of the gut wall. In depression, you see a number of the inflammatory markers. So the inflammatory markers tend to be higher. And what's beneficial is that when patients take the psychobiotics, what they're finding is that those psychobiotics are able to modulate the immune system, so it's able to bring down a lot of those inflammatory factors. It's modulating that inflammation, and it's actually able to help reverse the translocation, so the movement of those bacteria into the bloodstream. So it's actually helping with that leakiness of the gut. And then overall what we're seeing is that when you take those psychobiotics on a clinical level, we see improvement in terms of depression and anxiety. And I think it's important to understand the drainage of the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system is a closed system. So I picture it kind of like a funnel. So you have your superficial lymphatic system, which drains your head, your neck, your skin, your breath, everything's superficial. And then you have the deep lymphatic system, which drains all your deep vital organs. So because it's a closed system, the superficial lymphatic system drains into that deep lymphatic system. It all filters through the liver and then empties out the colon. So when you're looking at trying to get or encourage the proper drainage of the lymphatic system, you do have to look downstream and make sure that that's properly flowing, because if you don't have, say, for example, the colon is backed up, like you have constipation, then that's going to cause further congestion of the liver. And then the deep lymphatic system isn't going to be able to properly drain. And then we might see symptoms show up in the superficial lymphatic system, like things like depression and anxiety, or even things like headaches, because we can't properly drain the superficial lymphatic system. So it's always, you got to look downstream in order to figure out. Sometimes you got to do that in order to figure out what's going on in terms of that whole lymphatic system. Okay. So some of the ways that we can improve this gut integrity, because that's one of the major ways that toxins are moving into the lymphatic system and affecting how the brain's functioning. And one of those ways is taking probiotics that have the bifidobacterium and the lactobacillus in it. And the probiotic 7-in-1 from Biomed is one that does have it. And it helps to restore the integrity of that gut lining and helps to really help with the leakiness of our gut. And then NAG, so NAG, is helping to actually repair the tight junctions of the gut and help to just repair those mucous membranes of the intestinal gut. So we're just helping to improve the integrity of that gut lining. And then what needs to be done, after the system, after there's been a leakiness in this gut for a long period of time and a lot of inflammation happening, what we need to do after we've done that repair, that sealing of the gut, we need to re-educate that immune system. So one of the great ways of doing that is with some Byers patch organotherapy. So it's a great way. One of the remedies here is the pleoribazine. And it helps to just re-educate that whole gut, so that gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And so the next thing I'll talk about is the glymphatic system, which is also a newer part of the system. And the part of the nervous system is, one of the things that really protects our nervous system is something called the blood-brain barrier. And we need that blood-brain barrier to be intact in order for our nervous system to be in proper balance. And what's interesting is, what I find interesting is that, the blood-brain barrier also has these tight junctions, similar to the gut lining. So, but if there's some injury to that tight junctions of the blood-brain barrier, then the nervous system, the homeostasis of the nervous system, can be out of balance. So what helps to keep that in balance is actually the gut microbiome actually helps to regulate the integrity of that blood-brain barrier and helps to ensure that those tight junctions are strong. What's really interesting is that what mom's gut microbiome was while baby was in utero can actually affect the integrity of that blood-brain barrier. And it's interesting because, like, how many moms are thinking about, oh, I've got to keep my microbiome in good balance while I'm pregnant because this is going to affect how my baby's blood-brain barrier is developing and will also affect how their brain develops. So this, to me, is actually quite important information to be letting moms know. So the glymphatic system, what it is it's basically like lymphatic. It's like lymphatic drainage of the brain, but instead of the lymphatic fluids, what it is it's the fluids of the cerebral spinal fluid that helps to clean out really anything that shouldn't be in those spaces. So it's and that cerebral spinal fluid is throughout the entire nervous system, but it also is throughout the brain. And if we have dysfunction in how this glymphatic system is able to drain the brain effectively, then what we see is we can see depression, migraines, MS, Alzheimer's disease. And what they've shown is that the glymphatic system is what helps to move the amyloid beta, and if you have a collection of amyloid beta, then they're called amyloid plaques, which I think that most people have heard of in terms of you have a buildup of amyloid plaques, and that's the cause of Alzheimer's disease. But potentially that's associated with Alzheimer's disease, but not necessarily a causative factor. It can be that the body's just not effectively able to move out those amyloid betas out of our system. And when we see a buildup of that, then we start to see things like Alzheimer's disease. And what's interesting is that when the glymphatic system is cleaning itself up, it's the most active during our sleeping hours, and it's specifically most active during our deep sleep. And so if we can improve the amount of deep sleep people are having, we can improve glymphatic drainage, which is pretty significant in terms of brain health. So I wanted to go through some of the things that we could be doing to improve our sleep and improve sleep hygiene, because it's not just about the quantity of sleep, the amount of time in bed. It's about the quality of our sleep. And the better we can improve that quality of sleep, the more likely we are to also improve the amount of deep sleep we're having. So sleep hygiene is a huge one, and that's going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time, even on weekends, which I know can sometimes be challenging. You want to sleep in a room that's basically like a cave. So it's pitch black. You want it to be quiet. You want it to be below room temperature. And so some of the ways that we can do that in our modern world, is like living in a cave, is to use blackout blinds. If it's not totally quiet, like you live on a busy road, then use earplugs. And then making sure that you set that thermostat at 20 degrees or below. And just shutting off screens 2 hours before you go to bed. And then if you're not able to do that, then using some the blue blocking glasses can be very effective for making sure that blue light isn't getting into our eyes, because that can disrupt our melatonin production and affect our sleep. And another one that has been interesting as well is just stop eating 3 to 4 hours before bed. And so it's really cutting out those nighttime snacks can be helpful for improving the amount of our deep sleep we have. Stopping caffeine at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Some people are more sensitive to caffeine than others, but for the general public, stopping around 2. And then also just having some sort of soothing routine before bed, making sure, we have a calming tea, reading a book, hot bath, whatever you need to just kind of calm your system down and help to shift your body into that parasympathetic state. And I know I said it was not about quantity, it's about quality, but you still want to aim for as adults for that 7 to 9 hours, and it really varies for each person how much sleep we each need. And the connection with the glymphatic system and the psychobiotics is pretty interesting, is that the psychobiotics actually help to decrease the inflammation, decrease some of those cytokines. But what it's actually doing is it's actually helping to decrease the leakiness of that blood-brain barrier. So it decreases the permeability of that blood-brain barrier. So that plays a very significant role in terms of that glymphatic system and that protection of the glymphatic system, and very much ties in with how effective those psychobiotics can be in terms of how our nervous system functions. Now, here are just some tactics that we could be using to try to increase the glymphatic circulation and try to work on dissolving the amyloid plaques. And I would say that this would be beneficial not just for someone with potentially beneficial for someone with Alzheimer's or dementia, or has a history, like a family history of any sort of Alzheimer's or dementia or nervous system neurodegenerative problems. But I think that we could actually all benefit from making sure that we break down those amyloid plaques and make sure that we get our brain functioning at its best. So this is a sort of a tactic and approach to trying to get that glymphatic system working a lot better. And one of them is taking melatonin. Melatonin will help to increase the deep sleep. So even if we seem to be sleeping well, we actually want to make sure that even during those sleeping hours that our deep sleep, that we're getting enough deep sleep, because that can be definitely one of the challenges. And also, ginkgo and self-tonic, what they do is they help to increase circulation systemically, so throughout the whole body. But what they're also helping to do is they also help to increase circulation to the brain. And that's important when we're thinking about wanting to clean up the tissues of the brain. Now, what those amyloid plaques are is they are actually buildup of proteins. So a product like serotrophic is a proteolytic enzyme. So what it helps do is it helps to break down proteins. So the serotrophic would help to break down those amyloid plaques. And then we have the lymphodrop, and what the lymphodrop actually helps do is it helps to drain and clean up that glymphatic system. And then we have a probiotic. So the probiotic 7-in-1 helps to reduce inflammation, decrease the permeability of that blood-brain barrier. And really what it's doing is decreasing the leakiness of that blood-brain barrier. And what they've shown as well is in terms of draining that glymphatic system at night, one of the ways that we can try to enhance that is by sleeping on our side. Now, another physical connection with the gut-brain is the vagal nerve. So the vagal nerve is one of our cranial nerves that comes down the side of our neck, the front of our thorax, bisects through the diaphragm, and then it supplies all of our digestive organs. And it plays a big role in terms of the part of our autonomic nervous system called our parasympathetic nervous system. So it's controlling our heart rate, our breathing, our blood pressure, our digestion, all the things that we don't necessarily need to think about. And what they're showing is that if there is an infection going on, so there's an imbalance in that gut flora, that the way it gets communicated to our brain is through the vagal nerve, which is pretty interesting. It's like that vagal nerve has is basically like a sensory nerve in terms of communicating information from the gut to the brain. So it plays a big role in terms of that whole gut-brain connection. And another connection here is the enteric nervous system. So these are peripheral nerves that actually innervate the gut, innervate the gut lining. And it plays a big role in terms of carrying information from the gut to the brain. And then embedded within the lining of the digestive tract are these cells called enterochromaffin cells. And these cells are quite interesting because these are the cells that actually produce about 90% of the serotonin in our body. And what's interesting is that the cells that line the digestive tract, it's just really a single cell depth, right? A single cell lining. And with that, what's interesting is that we can have a communication with those cells, you can have a communication of releasing that serotonin into the gut lining, where all the microbiomes is, and it can also go the other way, where it releases serotonin into really the bloodstream or into the lymphatic tissue. But what happens is that information then can get released into those nerves and then send that signal back up to the brain. So it's pretty interesting how those cells, because they can go either way, because it's just a single layer of cells, that we can get communication really into that lumen of the digestive tract or into the nervous system. And serotonin is definitely one neurotransmitter that we talk a lot about in terms of brain function, because it's regulating our moods, it's regulating our sleep-wake cycles. And if we have low serotonin levels, this is associated with depression. And another key factor is that serotonin is made from an essential amino acid called tryptophan. And I think in further slides I'm going to be talking about tryptophan a bit more. And I think it's this next slide right here. And so first of all, when we have bacterial colonization of the intestine, we actually see an improvement, or we see an increase in serotonin levels, which would alternatively, you can see that would be beneficial with depression, because in depression what you see is low amounts of serotonin. So if we can get an increase by helping to balance out the microbiome, then we can actually start to see an improvement in terms of depression. And the microbes of the gut, they also are playing a role in terms of metabolizing different amino acids like tryptophan, and we need tryptophan in order to make serotonin. So that's really interesting as well. So what they've shown is that some of these psychobiotics can actually increase the amount of tryptophan, and when we get that, then we can get an increase of the serotonin. So there's another part of our system system. You can see how everything is very much interconnected. But we have this neuroendocrine system, which basically means it's a collection of cells that can produce hormones and neuropeptides. And one of the main ones that we talk about is that HPA axis, so the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And this is the HPA axis is what is stimulated anytime there are stressors in our environment. So this could be stressors that are physical or stressors that are psychological. Any of those stressors would activate the HPA axis. And if we have an increased activation of that HPA axis, then this is typically what we see in people who are, we see more in depression. And for when the cortisol levels are chronically elevated, then this can actually negatively affect how our brains are functioning. So what we see, and what we also see is that when that HPA axis is activated, it can change the composition of that microbiome, and it can also increase the GI permeability. So what we see is we're really just seeing this like bidirectional communication between the brain and the gut. Is that when we see a lot of that, really those endotoxins that are translocating into the circulatory system, it does activate the HPA axis, and then it'll communicate that stress response to the brain. So we definitely see a bidirectional communication happening. And what they've shown is that if mice are under stress, then they have a very different microbiome than the controls that weren't stressed. So you can imagine what's happening in our world right now with this pandemic and all the stress and fear and worry is that how much, if we have a lot of stress in our system, that actually changes that microbiome, and we actually have an altered abundance of the good, healthy bacteria when we have stress. And stress also will increase the intestinal permeability, so we'll see more translocation of the bacteria into circulation. So, stress can definitely be affecting this whole microbiome. And what's interesting to me, like as a clinician, I always think that, it's interesting how some people seem to just be wired differently, right? So some people respond differently to stress. And what we realize is that our stress response system, so that HPA axis, when we're first born, it's functionally immature at birth. And then what happens is that at birth, what's also happening is that we start to colonize the microbiome with some bacteria. And what's happening is that the stress response system is developing at the same rate that bacteria or microbiome is actually being colonized. And what they've shown is that if we have stress early in life, then it can affect how that HPA axis is actually programmed. So it can make it so that a person can be more reactive to stress, and this can actually happen over a lifetime. So what the study did, one of the studies did, was that the rats were actually separated from their mom early in life, so which is a huge stress on any baby to be separated from their mom. And with that stress, what they saw is changes in the diversity of the gut flora and the composition of that gut flora. And those changes continue continued with them for a lifetime and affected the programming of that HPA axis. And when we have alterations in that HPA axis, that can also be linked to mood disorders throughout a lifetime. But what was interesting is that we can reverse all of this. Because what we're showing is that with the psychobiotics, even if you have that early programming in terms of that stress response, when they gave the, in this case, I think it was when they gave the animals the psychobiotics, what they found was that they could actually reverse this hypersensitivity or this more reactive HPA axis. So, the psychobiotics were able to downregulate the HPA axis, and it helped to reduce the intestinal permeability. So, and also what we're seeing is that it helped to reduce anxiety. So those psychobiotics were able to reverse that early programming. Now, with the HPA axis, it's, interesting. Like, what we need to know is that, it's a body that is kind of stuck in that sympathetic state. It ends up being stuck in that sympathetic dominant state. And what we always want to be trying to help people to do is we want to be trying to help support people to be able to not just live in sympathetic all the time, but to be able to shift into parasympathetic. And, as naturopathic doctors and other healthcare practitioners, because I know it's not just naturopathic doctors on the call, but what we're really good at doing is we're really good at helping people, and we give people great tools to help shift into parasympathetic. So whether we're doing some mindful eating, or we're doing some deep breathing exercises, or some meditation, helping patients to learn how to shift into parasympathetic when they're really stressed can be very significant. And then we can also do that with remedies. So the Avena sativa, what it helps to do is it helps to calm the nervous system, and does help to support that autonomic nervous system and help to shift people that are able to shift into that parasympathetic nervous system. So I think that's always important to keep in mind, is being able to support that autonomic nervous system and helping people to be able to heal that way. Now, there's something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And often people will refer to this as fertilizer for our nervous cells, because that's what it's helping to do. It's helping those nervous cells to be able to grow and develop. And what they've shown is that in people with anxiety and depression, they tend to have low levels of BDNF. And what they've shown is that these psychobiotics are able to increase the amount of BDNF, and with that, what we see is we see a reduction in anxiety and a reduction in depression. And then we have another neurotransmitter called GABA, and I typically relate GABA more with sleep, but it's one of those inhibitory neurotransmitters, and it's also, when it's not functioning well or signaling well, it's linked to anxiety and depression. And what they've shown is that with the psychobiotics, it's actually able to help metabolize the glutamate, which is what we need in order to produce GABA. So it's really interesting, because a lot of those psychobiotics have the ability to be able to produce a number of those neuroactive amino acids, like the glutamate, like the tryptophan as well. And that's what helps in making a lot of these neurotransmitters. Now, the psychobiotics in terms of brain health, what they've shown is that, if the microbiome is out of balance, that it can contribute to inflammation in the brain, and it can contribute to cognitive decline. And in aged mice typically had an impaired microbiome, and they had problems with gut permeability and inflammation, and with that also came some problems with spatial memory and some anxiety-like behavior. And then when people took these not people, I think these were animals, these were mice, when the mice took the psychobiotics, what they found is that it increased memory. And what we're seeing is that, they had mice that were doing a maze learning task, and that when they gave them those psychobiotics, that they were able to improve in terms of that maze learning task. And with humans, what they found is that people who had some cognitive impairment, they tended to have more of the pro-inflammatory bacteria and less of those anti-inflammatory bacteria in their gut. So really what this is showing is that these psychobiotics can actually help to make us smarter. And then the psychobiotics overall, they do have like this robust effect in terms of altering our brain neurochemistry, and they're able to really help in terms of those anxiety and depression pictures. And the other area that's been studied is the psychobiotics in terms of pregnancy. And this is unfortunately something that we see a lot, is that a lot of women suffer from postpartum depression or anxiety. And what they found is that when they gave women a psychobiotic during and after pregnancy, that the numbers of that it significantly lowered the rates of depression and anxiety postpartum, which I think is actually quite significant. So what can we do about this, right? And I'm actually just going to go through this quickly in terms of what we can do is we can work on healing up the digestive tract. And one of the main things we need to do is we need to decrease the inflammation. We need to put out the fire. And then we need to work on healing up the lining of the digestive tract. We need to work on properly balancing the microbiome. We want to support organs of detoxification, and then we want to reestablish the proper function of the immune system. And I think one of the first steps is always identifying and removing stressors on the body, which would be causing inflammation. And I always say that there's 6 stressors that we need to be evaluating. So those are food intolerances, immune challenges, heavy metals, environmental toxins, anything physical, and anything emotional. And when we have a lot of inflammation, I'm showing you a picture there, but that's what the blood will look like when there's lots of inflammation. The blood gets really sticky and congested. And you can imagine that it's tough to get proper nutrients into the cells when the cells are all sticky like this. So I find that one of the major ways to decrease the inflammation, one of the major things that actually moves the needle in terms of inflammation, is removing the inflammatory foods. So that's gluten, cow's dairy, sugar, fried foods. I think that plays such a significant role in terms of reducing inflammation. But again, there's other inflammation that can definitely be going on in the body from environmental toxins that we take in through when we're having processed foods, through when our foods are sprayed with herbicides and pesticides, and also down to EMFs. And then heavy metals. And heavy metals, again, can be coming in environmental, but it can also be from those metal amalgams in the mouth, also from our foods. Infectious agents, things like viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites. We can have mechanical stressors, things like being structurally out of balance, and then we can have emotional stressors, which we know when we have a high amount of stress, we also get a high amount of cortisol, which can activate that HPA axis. And so I always want to stress the importance, because sometimes when we're talking about everything physical, we kind of forget about how much the emotional stressors can also have an impact in terms of our system. So to me, diet plays such an important role. So one of the ways we can be affecting this and helping with that inflammatory picture is to be avoiding those major inflammatory foods. We also want to try to eat organic and to stay away from the processed foods so that we decrease the chemical loads that we're taking in. And then other ways that we can just help to alkalinize that milieu so that we can, sometimes these things can help to move the needle even quicker than foods, right? So foods will take, they will take a bit more time, but the alkalinizers can definitely help to shift that milieu quicker. So things like the Alcala powder and the basic tabs, and they'll work on that extracellular space. And then the Pleosanivus and the Pleocitro, they work more on that intracellular space in terms of helping to decrease the alkalinity inside the cells. And then we want to heal up the lining of the digestive tract. So you want to give your body the proper building blocks to help repair those cells. All of those cell membranes are made of fat, so we got to make sure that we're consuming a lot of those healthy fats. So avocados, nuts, seeds, ghee, and a lot of those good healthy oils like coconut oils and extra virgin olive oil. And then supplements like the NAG, what it helps do is it actually helps to repair those tight junctions, because we need to reestablish that lining of the digestive tract. And then we need to work on balancing out that microbiome. And this is really important. I think it's so important in terms of how our bodies function, starting with a high-quality probiotic. I know there's lots of probiotics out there, but making sure it's a really high-quality one. And then I think it's also good to be also taking some natural probiotics and incorporating those into your diet if your system can handle it with some fermented foods. Prebiotics, what prebiotics really are is prebiotics are food for the healthy bacteria, so the healthy bacteria can help to repopulate. And I've listed off a number there, but really what prebiotics are the fibers in our food. So the more we eat really good vegetables, the more we're going to actually be taking in those prebiotics. And then Biomed has some great remedies for helping to balance out those microorganisms. So, like the Pleo-Alb and Pleo-Bef, it's really good for fungal overgrowth. And when we look at fungal overgrowth, like a lot of remedies out there for fungal overgrowth are just like killing off, even naturally, would just be killing off a whole bunch of fungus. But how these pleos work is the pleos just work to down-regulate the overgrowth of fungus, and then leave the ones that are at that natural normal level. So it plays definitely a very significant role in terms of trying to balance out that whole microbiome. And then we want to support the organs of detoxification. So we want to support the liver and the kidneys, the colon, the lymphatic system, the glymphatic system, which we've just learned about. And I have a whole webinar on this, and I'm doing it all in one slide. But I think what's really important to understand in terms of detoxification is that we need to clean up the spaces between the cells before we can start working on getting nutrients or supporting detox pathways with nutritionals. because I think that that's sometimes what people rush to, is that they'll be like, oh, I need to help, phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. But what happens is that those biochemical reactions happen within the cell. But if there's toxins all around the cells, then we can't get proper nutrients into the cells. So our first step in most cases is that you actually have to clean up the system at a cellular level, and you have to clean up that extracellular space, and that's what these remedies help to do, like the Hepatica and the Cardis and the Solidago and the Lymphodrop. They're cleaning up the spaces around the cells, and when they're clean, then that can allow botanicals and nutritionals to be able to get into the cell. So that's your next stage. And then once we've kind of healed up the lining of the digestive tract, we got the gut in balance, our body's detoxifying a lot better, what we want to do is then we want to help to re-educate the immune system. And one of the best ways that we can re-educate that immune system is with organotherapy, like the Byers patch. And it's really good at just making sure that we improve the immune system. And that's what we all need right now, right, is a good, healthy, strong immune system. And the Pleo Rebus really helps to re-educate and re-establish that good, strong immune system that's housed in the gut. And I think that this is like a huge paradigm shift in terms of how we treat and look at mental health. And I think that what we really need to be examining is that brain-gut microbiome axis. And that's in terms of any mental health issue. So from depression, anxiety, autism, Parkinson's disease, we have to be looking at that microbiome and that gut-brain connection. And I think that in order for us to effectively treat mental health, we need to look at balancing the microbiome. That, to me, is key. All right, so I think we're wrapping up here. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. If you need to contact me, there's my website, there's our Facebook page, Instagram. Follow me on Instagram. That's where I hang out the most. And then if you have any questions, I think I'll be sticking around here to answer questions in the chat room, or you can also send me an email. All right, and I'm going to pass this back over to Heather at this point.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Roberts. There was a huge amount of really important information that you presented in a very lovely and concise way. So thank you for that. And no yes, problem. There's lots of questions that have been coming through. Okay. So I thought maybe we could get started with some of those. Okay, so as far as, here we go. So improving gut health, what is your experience with helping to reduce adult anxiety and ADHD by addressing the gut health?
So I think that it actually normally surprises me that when I work on improving gut health, that how significant an effect it can have in terms of anxiety and depression as well. So yeah, I think I didn't tell the story today, but one of the ways that this really kind of showed me that how significant the gut was that I had a patient who one of the things that he had some OCD, and he also had some anxiety showing up, and what he had also had was he'd had digestive issues his entire life, and he had no idea that there was a connection between what was going on in his gut and what was happening with him on a mental health level. So I started just working on his digestive issues and his gut issues, and he came back and said, my anxiety is better, and I'm having less panic attacks, and he was even saying that like his OCD was showing to be a bit better. So it was very interesting that that just working on the gut health has a significant effect in terms of that mental health picture.
All right, thank you. And that, in a lot of ways, was exactly what your presentation was addressing tonight, the microbiome and the psychobiome and gut health and mental health issues. So, all right. So I have a question in here about melatonin, and it's a little bit of a technical question, so it may require follow-up outside of here, but there was a concern if taking melatonin or taking melatonin regularly could create an issue with the body not producing its own melatonin.
Are you going to answer that, or?
I can answer that for sure. So if you have anything to add to it, I can absolutely answer that question.
You start, and then I'll see if I can add.
For sure. So one of the things that happens as the body ages is the pineal gland is the major source of where melatonin is produced in the body. However, there's also lots of other tissues within the body, including in the gut, where melatonin is also produced. And I recently heard a comment saying that actually the gut, with the serotonin and the melatonin, the gut is actually more important for good sleep than anything else. So going back to the pineal gland, then what happens with the aging process is that it starts to calcify. And as the pineal gland calcifies, then melatonin production is reduced within the body, especially if the gut cannot overtake or take kind of over if the pineal gland is at a reduced capacity. And some of the things that can calcify the pineal is fluoride in the water, and also Wi-Fi and different kind of stimulus that's actually coming through the eyes. And so with all of that said, a lot of the times, especially when we're talking about an older adult population using melatonin, it could be that the melatonin is now substituting in because there's a melatonin deficiency in the body. And so so in some ways, melatonin is actually really helpful because it actually is able to resupply the body with the melatonin that it actually needs for that good night's sleep and to get into that deep stage 4 sleep for the detoxification. And then on the flip side of that, one of the studies that's quoted a lot is there was a study done out of the Netherlands where there were it was thousands and thousands of women that were taking 75 milligrams of melatonin a night for a 3-year period. And it was a safety study to see the long-term effects of high-dose melatonin, and there was no negative effects. And also when they stopped taking melatonin, it also did not stop their bodies from producing melatonin as well. So I think that generally that concern is not really, should not be a concern as far as taking melatonin, the body does not actually stop to produce it. And I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I don't have much to add to that. I think that, in terms of like my clinical experience, I've found that taking high doses of melatonin and then stopping has not affected people's sleep. Because I will put people on high doses of melatonin, like some of my cancer patients on high doses of melatonin because it has been shown to be effective for treating cancer. So there's definitely that connection there. And then the other little added bonus, I think, is that in terms of calcification of that pineal gland, one of the things that can help to dissolve that calcification can be vitamin K2. And so that can play a big role in terms of breaking down that calcifications really anywhere in the body and also in the pineal gland.
That makes sense, and actually that's a really good thing to add, because the additional thing by taking melatonin is you can actually start to uncalcify the pineal, and having that vitamin K2 in there to kind of grab onto the calcium and move it back into the bones would be very helpful. So, okay. So with N-acetylglucosamine, first of all, Dr. Nysgaard really enjoyed the clinical pearl about the lymphatics in the brain, so she thanked you for that. And then with using N-acetylglucosamine, she was just wondering for kind of length of treatment for closing up the tight junctions, how long are you, thinking about treatment? Is it for 1 month or is it for many months?
I'm typically doing it for like 1 to 3 months, and then just seeing. So I can do some testing to see if they're still showing some signs of leaky gut. But usually, like a 1 to 3 month is usually a way is enough time to be able to heal them up, which is, I think, pretty amazing in terms of considering that most people are walking around with leaky gut. But as I said, I think that another important aspect in terms of making sure that NAG works well is that you have to remove those inflammatory foods. Because if you just keep throwing in inflammation, then you could be taking all the NAG you want, but you won't be able to heal it up if you keep throwing those inflammatory foods in.
Yes, it's a really good point, and that's aside from just kind of general gut healing and gut health, from a biological medicine perspective, it's always take away the issues that are causing and triggering the problems before you can truly heal the gut up. And Dr. Rao, he talks about the gut and how the different cells and the different organs and tissues of the body have different turnover times, and so a lot of the time the gut protocols are around 3 months because that's kind of the turnover time for all those cells to come back to being healthy. So sticking to, as you mentioned, Dr. Roberts, off of the inflammatory foods and other inflammatory factors will then give the gut and the body the best opportunity to start to heal, and then whatever supplemental nutraceuticals you're putting in to support that, then the body can actually utilize those to also do that. Okay, so we've got some more questions. Okay. Just as a side, Elizabeth, yes, I saw your mention here about pleo organotherapy remedies. So I'll happily email you with some additional resources. And pleoribosan as a Peyer's patch remedy happens to be one of those, so I'm happy to share more. Okay, and then we've got a few more questions in the Q&A section, so I just had to I said now switch over here. Okay, and so, so Linda was asking about probiotics and taking them before bed. And so she's asking, is it best to take probiotics before bed? Should it be done on an empty stomach? Maybe if you're trying to do different things with different probiotics, is there different times of the day to use them?
I typically have patients taking them with food, so they're usually taking them with breakfast and with dinner. And so even if we're trying to affect the brain and affecting that glymphatic system, I'm typically still having them do it with breakfast and dinner. I don't know if Biomed advises differently, but that's what I typically am doing with my patients.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We don't advise differently.
Okay.
But the probiotics is like a long, it's a long run as far as I'm sure what's being done. And brain detox, the probiotics specifically aren't opening up circulation and creating a change right in that moment before going to sleep. So repopulating kind of generally in the gut is probably the most important part. So. Okay, so regarding blue light blocking glasses, when is the best time, or what is the best time to start wearing them?
The advice that I've been given was to wear them as soon as the sun goes down. So from sun goes down to when you go to bed should help you to increase your deep sleep.
Okay, great advice. Blue blocker glasses, sundown, which changes, of course, depending on the time of year.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Well,
okay.
I'm thinking like in Calgary, we have like in the summer, we have like these long days where it's like light out till 11. So it's not necessarily. Yeah.
You might be ending up in bed before the glasses actually go on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a few food questions here. When you're talking about reducing sugars in inflammatory foods, a question came up about, do you consider sugars within dried fruit like dates as a stressor for healing the gut?
So for natural sugars like fruit sugars and date sugars, I typically say to have small amounts. But I don't think they completely impede in terms of the healing. I just think that we don't want to have large amounts. And I think that sometimes when we're trying to take sugar out of people's diet, they're having large amounts. So I'm usually for natural sugars, especially our fruit sugars, I'm saying to reduce it to about 1 to 2 servings per day and to have it in the morning so it gives your body the entire day to be able to break it down. And you definitely don't want to have fruits before bed because you can get some fermentation happening in the gut. So yeah, that's my advice in terms of those natural sweeteners and fruits. I don't know if that was included in the fruits. Or is it just dates?
No, for fruits for sure. Fruits and dates. So,
yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, and then sticking on the food, sprouted grains, can they be classified as a prebiotic?
I'm actually not for the sprouted grains. Because I've still found the sprouted grains tend to be inflammatory in people, so I actually don't recommend sprouted grains. In terms of like the fermented, I prefer like I think I listed them there, like the fermented foods in terms of like a kimchi and a sauerkraut but I don't do any of the fermented grains. And then if we do fermented dairies, then the fermented dairies are going to be not cow related. So the fermented dairies can be goat, or you could do coconut or water. I'm trying to find the page, and I think I covered those all. Yeah. So, but I don't do any fermented.
Yep, page.
I don't do any fermented grains.
All right, perfect. And then there's just a couple more questions here. As far as inflammation, would you add EMF exposure with in connection with inflammation and the fight or flight in the body?
Yeah, I think it does. It would stimulate that adrenal response in our system, and so it does have can have like an inflammatory effect, the same as any sort of environmental toxin that's coming into the body. So I think more research is kind of coming out about that, but it's definitely seems to be, unfortunately, negatively affecting our systems.
All right. So there is another question here, and this is coming back a little bit more into the types of recommendations and detoxing I think that you were talking about. Would you work all 3 levels at the same time? And I believe this is when you were talking about decreasing the inflammation, healing the gut lining, building the healthy microbiome, supporting the detox pathways, and reestablishing proper function of the immune system. And
so
I'm pretty sure this question. Yeah,
or were
exactly.
they talking about detoxing in terms of?
I'm pretty sure Sue asked that question in the detox slide.
Yeah, because in the detox slide I talk about, in terms of detoxification, you have to really evaluate what level you're working at the liver, if you're working at it from a nutritional point of view, from a botanical point of view, or from a homeopathic point of view. And so, there are cases where I'll work on those levels all at the same time. And if you're asking about if you incorporate, decreasing the inflammation and healing the lining of the digestive tract and balancing out the microbiome and detoxing, for sure, I work on all of those levels at the same time, just depending on where the patient's at and where they're coming from. But but I think that in terms of that detoxification, I think that there is a specific way to do it. I think you do have to work on the primary organs of detoxification before you work on the secondary organs, and that you have to make sure that the area is clean before you start moving nutritionals in, because you can be giving people the best nutritional support for their liver, but if it can't get in that cell, then it's not useful. So just evaluating kind of where the patient's at.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the typical question sort of is how do you know where they're at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So what I've done with follow-up before with Dr. Roberts' presentations is in some of the slides she had kind of approaches with 1, 2, 3, 4, and often I'll line out some of that steps so that it doesn't look like you have to give everything all at once, because that's not really the general case. And I know, as Dr. Roberts just mentioned, it's not kind of the process. There's certain things that have to be done before other things are done. And it's not effective to be able to kind of lay out everything all at once for a patient, because that's just not quite the way the body works. So with that said, Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for presenting on Beyond the Gut, the microbiome and mental health. And thank you for going above and beyond and talking more about the microbiome and what psychobiotics are and how it connects to mental health and how it connects to the gut health. And also, very importantly, how does it connect to the brain and drainage and how all of that works together. So it was really wonderful. I've had lots of thank yous coming through in the last couple of minutes. So I know that those who listened really did enjoy the presentation tonight. And so thank you, as always, for putting this really wonderful presentation together and presenting it out to practitioners across Canada and the U.S.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me. Always a pleasure.
And I wish everyone a really wonderful evening and staying nice and healthy. Take care, everybody.